Okay, somehow the chunks reset yet again. I don't understand what's going on. I really hope that that's not gonna be a forever thing now, that literally every time I boot this up, I'm gonna have to check and see if it reset the number of chunks, because that's gonna be a pain. Because I am literally recording this the day after the previous video. So... Did I install yet another update after the ones I installed yesterday? I don't know. It has occurred to me I did not make a copy before I opened it up today. Hopefully it's fine. Hopefully. Okay, we loaded into the world. I think it's fine. Great. Okay, so let's start with duplicating some of this concrete powder, and I think we're gonna start with red, because I actually have some unfinished business, some loose ends that I need to tie up on this channel, for the sake of my sanity. You were not supposed to come over here. I specifically tried to make sure y'all would not come here. Why? Okay, well, anyway, we'll just ignore that for now. We're gonna duplicate red, and the reason we're gonna duplicate red first is because red is the color of tomatoes, and I realized that I had put out a poll. I'll put it, future me, please put the poll on the screen. Present me needs to pull up the poll so that I remember how I phrased things. So, in this poll, I said, is it most concerning for organic tomatoes to be labeled as A, gluten-free, B, lactose-free, or C, vegan? And the reason I asked this question is because I encountered organic tomatoes that were labeled gluten-free, lactose-free, and vegan. I don't know if I still have a picture of those tomatoes. I might not, but just use your imagination. So anyway, as you will hopefully be able to see from the screen cap of the poll, everyone voted that it was most concerning for them to be labeled gluten-free. And it has occurred to me, part of the issue with this might be that I did not specify what I meant by concerning. I mean, after all, I think a lot of people do suffer from celiac disease. So, obviously, I don't know what the numbers are. Maybe there's a higher number of people who suffer from issues with gluten versus people who suffer from issues with lactose. I don't know. Anyway, what I meant by the word concerning was just the idea of, I kind of assumed that all tomatoes were inherently gluten-free and lactose-free and vegan, so to find out that that has to be specified, it raises some questions. Of course, the more that I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe it did make sense for a tomato to need these labels. Let me explain. Alright, we filled the drip leaves, so now it's just duplicating them as is. Despite the fact that gluten-free was voted the most concerning, I actually think that's the one that makes the most sense. Because what I'm thinking is, imagine there's a farm, and they grow both tomatoes and wheat. Like, especially if they end up having to use any of the same, farming equipment, I can see how there might, be just a little bit of cross-contamination, that, there's bits of wheat stuff that get mixed in with the tomatoes. And then there's also the processing and packaging plants to worry about. I mean, you think about how many times they have to warn people that, oh yes, this was processed in a facility that also handles these other things. And so, I mean, I don't know what the threshold is. I don't know what amount of wheat stuff needs to be in something for someone to have a reaction who has a problem with gluten. But I can understand that being a concern, and they need to make sure that no one who's super sensitive is gonna have a bad time. Anyway, on to the second highest voted option, which was the fact that the tomatoes need to be labeled vegan. That does raise some questions, like, do the rest of the tomatoes, are they, like, grown inside of other animals? Like, what is going on here? But then, after I thought about it, it actually makes a lot of sense, because you think about it, fertilizer. Usually, we get that from, animal sources of some kind, whether it's, manure, or bone meal, or blood meal, which both sound kind of ominous now that I've said them out loud. But I can understand, like, if someone is very passionate about being vegan and they're concerned about the welfare of animals and they don't want to use any products that involve animals, I can understand how maybe that would be something they would look for, is to know that the plants were grown using vegan fertilizer. I can't guarantee for sure that's what these tomatoes being labeled vegan means, but I can understand it. And so that leaves us with the least voted answer, which incidentally is the one that I think is the most concerning: lactose-free. Now, full transparency, I have, on occasion, tried to grow tomatoes myself, and so I do know from that experience that tomatoes do need the soil to have a certain amount of calcium, which I guess milk technically has, but no one's ever told me to try watering my plants with milk. In fact, I'm pretty sure that would be a terrible idea, unless maybe that's a thing that you are supposed to do. I don't know. That sounds like the kind of thing ChatGPT would tell me to do, and so I'm not going to try it. And besides, if somehow supplementing, like, the minerals in the soil with milk was an issue, shouldn't that already be covered by the label saying that the tomatoes are vegan? Like, I genuinely don't understand, why do they have to label these tomatoes as being lactose-free? Are most tomatoes somehow... Like, I am really struggling to try and think of a justification for why tomatoes would need to be labeled lactose-free. Like, is there some sort of traditional dairy-based ritual that most tomato farmers use to ensure that they have a fruitful harvest? What is going on? Alright, let's see what we have. And I think then... Do I have 54 there? I guess we'll find out. Okay, 58, so that's not the right shulker box. So I have 58, so yes, that is enough. Okay, I'm not done talking about tomatoes yet though, so we're gonna duplicate the green, because green tomatoes are a thing that exist. I should put the red concrete powder away first though. I'll stick it in the barrel below the collectibles barrel. That seems like a good idea, and I'll put the extra in here too. I mean, my tomatoes aren't doing the best this year, and I have to wonder, is it because I'm not doing this secret dairy ritual? I mean, the more plausible explanation is probably the fact that I'm using some pretty old seeds. Like, I ordered them, I think, in 2020 for, reasons that I'm sure you can guess. And so it is possible that it's just the fact that the seeds are old, and that's why the plants aren't doing so well. Or it could be the secret dairy ritual. I have no way of knowing for sure, because I don't know what the ritual is. No one has told me. I don't even know if it exists. My only clue is the fact that someone felt compelled to label tomatoes as being lactose-free, and I genuinely... Why? Why would they need to be labeled lactose-free? Shouldn't that be obvious? Alright, well, all of the drip leaves are full once again, so now it's just repeatedly hopping back and forth, and I should probably put this with the rest of the red concrete powder before I do something silly like put it in a random chest. Like, with how quickly milk spoils and how terribly it smells when it spoils, I can't imagine someone giving you the advice to put milk on your tomato plants. Unless this is one of those situations where good advice goes against what you would think would be common sense, because sometimes life is very bizarre in that way. There is, of course, the possibility that this is just the result of, companies doing whatever their market research has indicated, especially because these were organic tomatoes. I can see them running some sort of focus group that shows that people purchased more tomatoes when they were labeled as being gluten-free and lactose-free and vegan. I can definitely understand. Maybe this is all just about being able to slap as many marketable terms on your product as possible. Because, I mean, it's a tomato. It's a tomato. The main thing with the tomato is the size, because the size dictates how you use the tomato. If it's a large tomato, you slice it to put on a sandwich or a burger. And if it's a small tomato, you cut it up to put in a salad. I mean, sure, that there have been some innovations with genetically modified tomatoes making them last longer, but I don't know that there's been that much innovation with tomatoes. Alright, let's see where we're at. Okay, and we are about halfway done already. Very nice. Making good progress. So, yeah, for the sake of my sanity, I think I'm just going to assume that the reason they labeled those tomatoes the way that they did is just for marketability, and it's not to indicate that other tomatoes are filled with gluten and lactose and are non-vegan. Yeah. While we're on the subject of tomatoes, I feel like I have learned a lot from trying to grow my own. For instance, it's something that I realize now is sort of common sense, but the further you need a plant to be in its life cycle to be able to get the harvestable goods from it, the more opportunity there is for something to go wrong. And in case my words were not clear, what I mean is, if you're able to harvest something when it's just a leaf and you don't have to worry about it blossoming and then growing a fruit, if you just have to grow the leaf, there's fewer opportunities for things to go terribly wrong than if you have to be able to get a fruit from the plant. Okay, and we're almost done. Probably just one more hop. Yeah, just one more hop. Go ahead and turn all of these off, and we're done with the green concrete powder. But I'm not quite done talking about tomatoes, so I think we'll do lime, because that's kind of a shade of green. Actually, while I have them both here, I know that this is called green, and this is technically called lime. And if you asked me if both of these were green, I would say yes. But if you asked me which one was a better example of green, I would probably pick the lime, because I feel like this is closer to sage. But maybe that's just me. Anyway, I'll put it in the barrel with the other concrete powder and pick up the lime. So like I said, I think I have learned quite a bit from working with tomatoes, because I didn't realize how many things can go terribly wrong. Because for comparison, like if you're growing something like spring mix or lettuce, you do have to worry about something eating the leaves, which you need to worry about with tomatoes, because obviously they have leaves. But then it doesn't go straight from leaf to tomato. You have to wait for the plant to produce buds first, and then you have to make sure that the buds don't fall off or get eaten, and that they're able to mature into flowers. And I don't remember how many aphids... I forgot to flick the levers on that side, whoops. I don't remember how many aphids I had to pull off of the tomato plants last year. I just know that it was a lot. Because it's like you would think you would get all of the aphids, and then you would realize that there were more on the other side. Now, for some reason, I haven't seen that many aphids this year, so I at least haven't had to deal with that. So anyway, let's say that you've successfully protected your plant. The leaves were able to continue growing, were able to support the growth of buds, and now you have flowers, and let's assume that nothing has eaten the flowers or knocked them off. Now you need to wait for the flower to do its thing to start producing a tomato, which takes a lot of time. Like, it's not a thing where the flower, gets turned into a bright red tomato, 2 days after the fact. It can take, a month or more. And so you have to worry about pests trying to eat the tomato, as it's, starts out as this very tiny green thing, and then eventually gets larger and eventually turns red. And then, I don't know if you remember that I mentioned calcium is important, because if your plant doesn't get enough calcium, do you know what happens? Your tomato, that's otherwise doing perfectly well, there's nothing wrong with it, suddenly a dark spot will start forming on the end of the tomato, and it will turn black, and it will start to rot. And that's called blossom end rot, and it's terrible. I have another extra green concrete powder. How does this keep happening? And the reason blossom end rot is such a problem is because, the tomato is starting to rot, which is bad. I think most people, if they know what the word rot means, they'll be able to infer that blossom end rot is a bad thing. But just so we're clear, it's not good. And the thing that's frustrating about trying to troubleshoot blossom end rot is that it might not be that the soil doesn't have enough calcium in it. The soil might have plenty of calcium. The issue is that the tomato plant isn't getting enough water to be able to absorb the calcium. And so until you're able to successfully troubleshoot what is the root of the problem, if it's insufficient calcium in the soil or insufficient water for the plant to pick up the calcium, you oftentimes end up having to take all of the rotting tomatoes off of the plant, throw them away, and then wait for the tomato plant to produce new blossoms, which, like I said, takes a while. And you compare this with something like spring mix or even kale, and all you have to do is, when you see the leaf has grown to a decent size, you just go ahead, chop it off, and, more will grow coming from the terminal bud. And that'll take maybe a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, whereas the tomato could very easily take another month or more. Of course, the good thing to come out of all of this is I now have a very much heightened appreciation for all the effort that farmers and, their various employees and other workers go through in order to make sure that, we have things like tomatoes and other crops, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work just for me, the person growing plants on my porch in a container, LARPing as a farmer. It's that much work for me. I can only imagine how much work it is for people who it's their actual job. On the flip side, this has also amplified the guilt I feel whenever I, accidentally allow some produce to go bad. Because now I have a slightly better idea of how much work goes into making sure that it's able to get to the stage where it's edible. And we're done with the first row, almost halfway there. And so after dealing with aphids and blossom end rot and everything else, it got to a point last year where I just wanted to be done with gardening, and so I was very relieved that the end of the growing season was rapidly approaching. Of course, it probably also didn't help that towards the tail end we ended up having a lot of appointments and other things that made life just that much more hectic and complicated to manage. Alright, almost done with the second row. And it even got to the point towards the tail end where, the last couple weeks of the growing season, I just kind of didn't water the plants at all. It's not that I intentionally did it, it's just, like I said, we were super busy and time got away from me, and when you have a whole bunch of other commitments on your mind, when it comes to people versus plants, usually you prioritize the people. So that's what I did. But obviously we couldn't just leave the plants as they were over the winter, so, we went out and, tore everything up, handled that. And incidentally, I was expecting that everything would be withered and terrible when we went out. But there were a couple of green tomatoes, they weren't ripe, but there were a couple of green tomatoes that had formed on the vines, despite the fact that I had not been watering regularly. And it was while I was pulling some of the green tomatoes off of the plant that I finally understood how people could go through all of the pain and difficulty of having a child and deciding to do it again. Because as much as I hated having to deal with aphids, and it was frustrating to make sure that my plants didn't dry out too much, that they would get enough calcium to avoid blossom end rot, holding that green tomato, and I was so excited at the thought of starting new plants the following spring. I feel like I probably should state that I know that there's a big difference between growing some plants and having a child, though, because obviously there's a big difference between me forgetting to water plants for a couple of weeks versus, not taking care of a kid for a couple of weeks. One of those is going to have an extremely bad outcome, and the other is only going to be mildly inconvenient. It is also a little concerning that after weeks of being neglectful, I momentarily thought, oh hey, I can't wait to take on more responsibility. I'm gonna try to not think too hard about what that says about me as a person, though. Okay, and we're done with lime. I did not need to duplicate quite as much, but that's okay. I will just put these in the barrel with the other excess concrete. Take this back. Ooh, Wandering Trader. Do you have what I need? You do not have what I need. Okay, and that does it for the lime concrete powder. And I think I've probably spent enough time today talking about tomatoes. So, until next time, take care.